Hello and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast. Today, my guest is Kris Batzner, and our topic is Kundalini Yoga. I think out of all the different styles of yoga, Kundalini is the one that has the most myths and the most misconceptions, and today we bust them wide open. I think after hearing this podcast, you yourself are going to want to try out a Kundalini Yoga class because it is so beautiful and so powerful. So today we talk about the origins of Kundalini, we talk about the scandal behind Yogi Bhajan, we talk about the mudras, the breath, Kundalini awakening, and so much more. I hope you'll have some beautiful takeaways from this episode. I want to thank you so much for being here. If you're enjoying them, please give us a like, a share, and a subscribe. And so much gratitude if you leave us a comment and a review. And I'm going to hop on in with my episode with Kris today. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast, a place to explore possibility through mindfulness, movement, and self-discovery. Our intention is to deliver insight and inspiration while fostering conversations that are genuine, unfiltered, and deeply human. We hope you will enjoy today's episode. Hi, Kris. Welcome to the Connected Community Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about Kundalini Yoga with you today. I think a lot of people know about yoga. Some people put all the different styles of yoga into one box, and all the different styles are vastly different. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that I've been teaching yoga for 20 years, and I know so little about Kundalini Yoga, which I think will be good because it'll help the audience. I'll probably have as much knowledge as our audience. And so, what is Kundalini Yoga? Specifically yoga versus a Kundalini awakening, and how is that differentiated from the other styles of yoga?
Great questions. And don't feel bad. I've been doing yoga my whole life, and I literally just found Kundalini maybe 6 years ago or so. And so I had heard about it before, but I'd never tried it. Back when I was doing my own yoga online, I was a member of Gaiam, and there were like Kundalini practices, and I thought, oh, I'll try that, and I never did. So you're not alone.
Thank you.
Not a lot of people know about it. So, and there's a lot in your question. So I'm going to start by just talking about Kundalini in regards to other branches of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And Kundalini in and of itself is an ancient practice, just like the rest of yoga is. It's one of the different variants of yoga. And the difference is that it is divine feminine based, it's more energetic based, and it is breath led. So I always describe Kundalini as a practice of breath, sound, and movement, because all three of those come together. And we are focusing on regulating and harnessing the vibration of our body, and that's sound and that's breath, and the vibration of the world around us, and kind of coming into attunement with that through movement, through breathing, through mantra singing, I like to call it, because people get nervous when I say mantra or chanting. And so we just are using our voice, which is our own personal sound fingerprint.
Yeah. Okay. So that is very different because I think of most yoga practices sync movement and breath, but then we're not adding in sounds. The only person making the sound is the teacher.
Correct. And Kundalini, in my opinion, reverses the chain of those linkings, where in like traditional yoga, like vinyasa or even just hatha, we find the posture first and then we're reminded to breathe in the posture.
Yeah.
Whereas with Kundalini, we start with a breath and then we add the movement in. And so we, inhale and exhale. And if we're moving, it's inhale and exhale, inhale, exhale. It's not, we're twisting to the right and to the left. It's we're leading with the breath and then we're adding the movement into that as we go.
Okay. So breath first, movement second, sound with
Yes.
it.
100%. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to say like a whole stereotype here for people with Kundalini Yoga, because it's been my stereotype in the past, and I definitely know that other people have this stereotype where when we think of Kundalini Yoga, we think of everybody wearing white, a little bit of a cult-like mentality, and then, the women or the men wearing the headdresses, the wraps on their heads. And so I think that stereotype prevents people from even exploring Kundalini. So can we just break open those stereotypes, and are they valid, and which ones are valid and which ones are important and things like that?
Wow, I love that question. Okay, so one of the main reasons I teach Kundalini and I talk about Kundalini is because I want to break those stereotypes and those like beliefs around Kundalini, because this practice is just like a practice of yoga. And it is just, I mean, it's as powerful and more powerful, and it feels magical because it really shifts awareness. And so I came to Kundalini after kind of the whole Yogi Bhajan fiasco, which we can talk about later if you want. And my teachers were never ones that were all about, oh, you have to wear white and you have to follow the lineage of the gurus and all of that stuff, because I am a rule breaker in general. So that doesn't resonate with me. And the way they taught Kundalini was really the understanding of how it impacts the body and our awareness. And you can, like, I did a practice earlier in these clothes. And, like I like to wear a lot of white, but because I like that color. And I think the history of that, just like any other lineage of yoga, there's things that you're supposed to do. Like we do Shavasana. There are practices, Ayurvedic practices where you're a yogi, like are you living the yogic lifestyle? And there's, you drink your warm lemon water and you scrape your tongue and all that kind of stuff. And so Kundalini, the wearing of the white and the practicing of the purity is what that I think has traditionally been seen as, is just another part of that layering of the spirituality practice of it. That is beside the point in the practice of Kundalini. And I really love my teachers, Brett Larkin and Guru Singh. And Guru Singh, he wears the head wrap, right?
Yep.
And that's great if he wants to do it. But even he says, like, do what you're comfortable with. And the whole reason that people traditionally wear head coverings in the Kundalini practice is because it is more of a vibrational energetic practice. And so a theory is, whether it is practiced or not, and whether you believe it or not, some people feel like they have more grounding in their own body when they have their head covered. So when we deal with chakras and energy centers, you know that different chakras are associated with different colors, right? And so white is the absence of color, whereas other colors stimulate the energy. If we're talking about vibrations, like everything has a vibration. And so different colors can stimulate different chakras. And so I think that is the theory behind why traditionally people wear white in Kundalini, because it is very much more of an energetic practice when we go into that understanding of vibration and syncing vibrations and entrainment and shifting vibrations in order to raise our awareness. I don't wear white when I practice. I don't have everyone else wear white. I don't cover my head. I am also a rule breaker.
Well, is there a correlation between Sikhism and Kundalini Yoga?
So yeah, there's two different lineages of Kundalini, and one is the Sufi Kundalini, the Sufi lineage, and then the other one, I don't remember what the other one is off the top of my head, but it is related to some of that, yeah. And just like all yoga, it originated as a spiritual practice, and so Kundalini is no different with that.
Okay. Okay. And then something else that's distinct to Kundalini Yoga is the Kriyas. And when we were on our call before, you were saying there's Kriyas and they're spelled two different ways and they mean two different things, which I never knew. So can you talk about the two different ones, which one is embraced by Kundalini and what it is?
Sure. So what we do in Kundalini is Kriyas, which is Krya. And that just basically means full body, a complete set of movements, right? And so you can it's like a mini practice almost, is kind of how I describe it to people that aren't familiar with it. And so Kriyas that we use in Kundalini are very much the full body aspect of the practice. And so they are well balanced, well versed, somewhat repetitive movements. And then there's Kriyas, which is Kriya, which is something completely different. And so in Kundalini, we use Kryas, Kriyas, which simply means complete sets of movement.
Okay. Is the whole purpose of Kundalini Yoga to waken the Kundalini energy in the body. So it spirals from the lower chakras in the lower part of the body all the way up through and out of the crown.
So you talked before about how like traditionally we wear white, right? I personally believe like this is kind of a traditional view of what Kundalini is, and I don't think it's accurate. I've
Okay.
had a lot of people say to me, "Oh, I've had this Kundalini awakening. I had this really weird experience, and I didn't sleep for 3 days, and that was my Kundalini awakening." And it's like, maybe, it very well could be, but that, in my opinion, is not what the goal of Kundalini is. Like, I'm a somatic practitioner as well, which
Mm-hmm.
somatics and Kundalini go so hand in hand.
Yeah.
When you think about Kundalini energy, and we think about Kundalini as the divine feminine practice, that feminine energy is often tamped down in all of us, right? That creative, expressive, emotional, intuitive, all of that aspect of ourself is often turned off or dampened. And so for me, Kundalini invigorates that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't think of it more as like an elevation. I think of it as an expansion in all directions. And
Mm.
often, if again we go back to chakras, right, like that sacral
Yeah.
chakra is where all of that rests, and so it correlates to other different systems that deal with energy as well. And so that belief of that Kundalini energy in the bowl of the pelvis, well, that's where our sacral
Mm-hmm.
chakra is, right? And that Kundalini is that feminine energy that rises and gives us expression, gives us intuition, gives us emotion, and so in rising, I think of it more of an expansion. And then the other aspect of that too is that it isn't one directional. When that expansion happens, often we think of that dual entwining energy rising, like through the Sushumna,
Yeah.
which is along the spine. But with my perception of it, it also anchors us back down. And that's kind of where the somatics comes in as well, is because I want to be in my body. I don't want to be out of my body. And
Mm-hmm.
so Kundalini brings that awareness. It shifts my perception of the world around me, but it also, the way I teach it, brings me back into my body. So there's a duality of flow
Mm-hmm.
through an expansion of all aspects of the body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I'm thinking about some people are just way too grounded
Yeah.
and they're not like not they don't have a spiritual element or an ability to think
Uh-huh.
outside the box at all.
Uh-huh.
And then we know those people that are like super airy that are floating around in their heads and in the clouds, but they're not grounded. And so it's bringing those energies, activating them both and balancing them from what I'm hearing you're saying.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
because the
Yeah.
whole point of this, of anything that we do, is to bring us to wholeness, right? And whether it's that masculine feminine, whether it's grounded and aware, the whole point of what we're doing is to become whole. And so when
Yeah.
we only have a one directionality of energy, we're not accomplishing that goal at all.
Okay, and you're saying that Kundalini is a feminine energy, yet it was created by man. And so tell me about that piece of it.
Yes. So yoga in itself was created by guys, right? Like a bunch of
Yep.
old guys that wanted to go meditate in the forest for days, right? And so they
Yep.
their bodies couldn't do it, so they made this practice so then they could go sit in the forest for days. Kundalini is just that, and it's interesting because my teacher Guru Singh calls Kundalini yoga of the householder. And
Hmm.
so as like traditional yoga was being created, it was a spiritual practice that was only for the monks and the people, the guys that were going to go sit in the woods. And everyone else was like, well, what about us? Right? We want to do that too. But we have families, we have households, we have jobs. We can't just go sit in the woods for 5 days and become enlightened. And so Kundalini started to be developed in that sense traditionally as yoga of the householder. And so the guy that created Kundalini wasn't really the guy that created Kundalini. Guru Yogi Bhajan was the guy who brought Kundalini to America, and that happened in the
Hmm.
70s, 60s or 70s, I think. And he brought it over from India and went out to California and made it really super popular. He was a great marketer. That's what I tell people. Like, he really is great at marketing himself. And
Hmm.
it became very cult-like because that was how he taught it. And, you had to have the lineage and you had to be taught by him or you weren't doing it right. And, I think anytime anyone, regardless of whether it's Kundalini or anything, says something like that to you, then but you need to question it. Right.
And yeah, Bikram did the same thing.
Exactly. Right. Like we see this happen
Yeah.
time and time again in all of these different practices and all of these, and even outside of yoga, right. And lots of different aspects of our world. And so, yes, Yogi Bhajan brought it to America, but he did not create it. Just like, the people that try and copyright yoga sequences, like it's the same thing. It's not theirs. Like he marketed it really well and brought it in a way that made it he tried to make it his proprietary intellectual right, but it wasn't his at all.
All right. So now the cat's out of the bag about Yogi Bhajan. Let's just dive into that just for a minute. I don't want that to be the focus of the podcast.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people that hear the remnants of like what happened with Yogi Bhajan, and he's associated with Kundalini, same as John Friend was connected with Anusara, and he did some pretty shady stuff. And then all the people in Anusara world didn't even know how to like manage that.
Yeah.
And Bikram's patent his things. Patabi Joyce has been accused of things. Rodney Yee was, with students. Like this is common, unfortunately, with the yoga community, and that's unfortunate. And so I know that there were allegations of Yogi Bhajan financially taking advantage of people, but more importantly, there was accusations of rape and sexual misconduct and inappropriate touching. And so where do you stand with all that? Like, is there enough evidence to back that up, and have people been able to successfully separate the teachings from the teacher? And like the teachings are amazing, but maybe the teacher had some things around morality that weren't so great.
Yeah. And I think this is important to have a conversation around as we talk about Kundalini, because I think that we need to acknowledge kind of what happened and validate the victims in that experience. I personally came to Kundalini after all of that had happened. I kind of came at the very, very end where all of the fallout was happening and people were leaving the practice. In fact, the first person that I wanted to be my teacher, I approached her and, asked if she would teach me. And she said, I'm not doing it anymore. And her teacher isn't doing it anymore. And it was because of everything that had happened with Yogi Bhajan. And so I think that this conversation is still very painful and emotional, as it should be, because the accusations are abhorrent. I don't know how else to describe that. And I want to validate the accusations. I have not done my own research other than for me personally, I feel like it happened, and I don't think he was a very good person. And I just, like you listed off a handful of men, of leaders that were in this, this role and totally abused their power. I think that's exactly what happened. And it is sad that it's so intertwined with the practice of Kundalini, because so many people have left the practice because Kundalini has such a bad rep. And Kundalini was so much more of an energetic practice already that it is kind of on the fringe. Like, it's different than normal yoga. And so that makes people a little bit hesitant. And then you have this added layer of this abusive guru who literally put himself on this pedestal and abused his power. And that turns even more people away because it's really hard to untangle it. And I think this is still pretty fresh in the Kundalini community. And it's difficult for people to talk about. A lot of people probably experience it because literally Yogi Bhajan was the person who required everyone to learn from him. And if it wasn't him, it was his immediate teachers, which we now know he abused a majority of them. And so it makes sense that people move away from that practice. I understand it and I respect that. But the practice in and of itself isn't that. The practice in and of itself comes from the ancient lineage, right? From India, from the development of this energetic spiritual practice. And my goal is to teach it in a way that makes it more accessible and allows it to be welcoming and inclusive again, because it's a beautiful practice and it's a shame that it has kind of this ugly mark on it. And yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge and talk about, because again, if we don't talk about it, then it sits there and gains power. And the only way out is through it. And discussing it, I think, is super important.
I mean, there's so many barriers for somebody moving towards Kundalini
Uh-huh.
based on that. And then also the things that we talked about earlier, all those stereotypes and the
Yeah.
misconceptions and the outsider's perspective when people haven't done it. And so there is like a whole layer and a barrier that people have to like bust through to even get introduced to it.
Yeah.
And then I think it's so different than other yoga practices. If somebody goes in thinking it's going to be similar to any other yoga class that they've taken, they're going to be a little bit shocked. So if somebody was completely new to Kundalini yoga, like a traditional Kundalini yoga class, what can they expect going into that class from start to finish? And what are the threads that are similar throughout most classes?
So the first thing I will say is you're going to sing, or people are going to sing around you.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said earlier, I don't like to call it chanting. It's chanting. We're singing mantra. We're chanting mantra. But there is such, again, that stigma around it, right? And it literally is just using your body as a vibrational vessel to create
Mm-hmm.
alignment and awareness. And so you're going to sing, and people are going to be singing around you, and it's probably going to be in Sanskrit. I mean, I have some beautiful mantras that are in English as well. You're welcome to, I always encourage people to make up their own words if something feels more resonant to them than whatever we're
Yeah.
using in our mantra. And there's going to be repetitive movement. And
But
so,
let me interrupt you really quickly about the singing. Are
mhm.
you singing like the same word chanted over and over again, or are you doing like a lengthy chant?
Yeah. So, yeah, mantras can be short and long. Like sometimes I simply use the heart mantra, which is that HUD, that sound, that seed sound of the heart chakra of HUD, 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 HUD. It's just that over and over. It can be a little bit longer with the Om Mani Padme Om, like Om Mani Padme Om Mani Padme Om Mani Padme Om. And then it can be longer, like Ekongkar, which is like a longer mantra that is Ekongara Satanama Siriwa Hey Guru. And then there's ones that are even longer than that. But I tend to
Mm-hmm.
keep them short because it's accessible, and I want people to be like feel successful at doing this,
Mm-hmm.
and not be intimidated by it.
So the Om Mani Padme Hum, and then the
Mhm.
other one that you talked about. Can you talk about the meaning of those so that people think like they're going to go and they're going to chant something and it's going to be satanic
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
religious or something, and then that freaks
Yes.
them out too because they don't know what it is.
100%. And I always, anytime I use mantra, every single time I interpret it. So I explain what we're using. And I always say that we're speaking in Sanskrit, which is simply the language of yoga, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just it's a foreign language, right? And so when we speak in Sanskrit, this is what it means. And I always give them the opportunity to say it in English, right? And so instead of speaking to Sanskrit, and I always try and give it to them written as well, so they have it, they can see it with the translation. So the HUD is literally, they have seed sounds of each chakra. So these are vibrational sounds that we make with our body that stimulate different chakra centers, different energy centers. This is the theoretical practice of it, right? And whether you want to go there or not, that's fine. The intention of the word HUD is to resonate the chest, to stimulate the soft palate, which connects the brain and the heart. So we're stimulating different parts of our body, which in chakra language means we're connecting that crown chakra and the heart chakra. So that enlightenment and the sense of community and connection to others, right? So that's that mantra. And it literally is just a sound, right? It's like humming. It's the same kind of thing. The Om Mani Padme Om is peace. We have peace together. Om is that seed sound of the universe, the resonance of everything around us. Mani Padme Om, it is, I am peace, I give you peace, I have peace in my hands, however you want to interpret that. And then the Ekongkar is kind of a combination, but the interpretation of the mantra is the past, present, future, and kind of bringing it all together into the present and into our body, and kind of bringing us into not an ecstatic state, but a joyful state of unification.
So is the purpose of that with setting intention and then opening up different channels?
Yeah. And so I always use mantra as simply intention, right? Like when we set intentions in regular yoga practice, we have a focus, right? Like that intention is simply a focus. And so the mantra is just a focus for our awareness or our direction of thought or whatever the case may be. Same with mudras. I always try and pair a mudra with a mantra because mudras are simply the language of our hands. And so that just gives us another layer of intention setting and focus. So as we practice or as we're saying these words that are reminding us of why we're here, we have another way to anchor it in so we don't get distracted, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as you're describing this, I'm visualizing in my head a lot of sitting, breathing, and chanting. But I know that there are pieces of the Kundalini practice that are pretty intense and can get your heart going and things like that. And so can you share a little bit about how the movements are and how it's a really active practice too?
Yes, you will move your body. You'll sweat, and there will be things that you do that you probably do not want to do. It's going to be a challenge. Like there will be parts of your practice that will be challenging. And this isn't even just like holding chair for 2 minutes, right? Like there's going to be things that you do that you're just like, this is insane. I'm not doing this. And that's part of it, right? Is to kind of figure out who you really are and what you're willing to do and how you respond to challenges and letting that kind of carry you forward, right? I tend to start with a mantra. We tune in with our voice, and then we take a moment to breathe, and then we start to move our body. So the majority of our practice is moving our body. And with that, I just describe it as repetitive movements. And so whether we are going from a squat to a forward fold, to a squat to a forward fold, for a squat to a forward fold, or whether we're simply moving our head in a circle or moving our body in a circle, we do it for a set amount of time. And typically it's 2 to 7 to 11 minutes, whatever fits with that kriya. There's that word again. And so the movement that we do isn't just like, I'm going to circle and then I'm going to take a forward fold and then I'm going to stand up and do downward dog. And that, it's very much like we're going to sit here and do this for a minute. And then we're going to go the other way for another minute. And then we're going to move on and, maybe we have our hand at our heart and we're just going to pulse in warrior 2, right? Like hud, hud, hud. And so we add in that mantra. And so it's a very repetitive movement. And the purpose of doing movement in that way is that it allows our body to learn the movement in a completely different way. It lets it sink in deeper. It gives us a completely different awareness of how we're moving, what we're doing, and how we are going to remember that and feel it in our body. Because it's not just once. We're not just like sitting in a forward fold and then we move on. It's like, oh, we're going to a forward fold and then we're going to frog. And when we do that 25 times, that's a very different sensation in our body than if we do it just once.
Yeah. So it sounds like easy movements that are accessible to most people, but then with the repetition, that's what makes it hard.
Yeah. Well, and yes, and there are other things where like there's one where you're kind of in a low boat and you're doing breath of fire for eternity, and 30 seconds feels like eternity. And then there's other intense postures that we do in Kundalini, but yes, the duration of time makes it challenging.
So I was doing a Kundalini little exercise with a friend of mine, and she had me with my arms in goalposts. My elbows were shoulder height, and it was paired with breath. And I was struggling, and I'm really strong. I was struggling to hold my arms up that long.
Yes.
And so do you just push through that discomfort and then see what arises? And that's kind of part of the practice?
Yes, with a but. I tend to teach Kundalini very accessible because my goal is to have as many people experience this practice as possible. And like you said earlier, there's so many barriers already that if they make it in the door and are on their mat with me,
Yeah.
I'm going to make it as fun and feel good as much as I can with them. Yeah, there's going to be challenge. And so what I would say to you in that situation is rest when you need to, listen to your body, because that's a really big part of Kundalini is really that intuition, trusting your body. And then if you need to take a rest, that's fine. Imagine you're still doing it or adapt. Like often I say, elbows come to the ribs as you're doing this, and then return when you feel ready. And so it is a game of how long will I push it without hurting myself? Like, where is my edge in that aspect of it? And really making sure that I give people permission to take a break.
Yeah. I mean, I've had that with Breath of Fire where it's so intense and I've done it for extended amounts of time and I almost feel like I'm going to pass out. And so I have to stop, take some breath, chill out, and then go back to it. So and that's a breath that's pretty intense and active, I imagine. And my heart is beating. And then after I do it for a few minutes, I'm sweating.
Yes. Yeah. It's called Breath of Fire for a reason, right?
Right.
Yeah. And that's also a good example of kind of why we do repetitive movement as well. And I love Breath of Fire and I love teaching it because it's a great example of how in Kundalini and in that repetitive movement, your mind turns off. There comes a point where your mind turns off and your body kicks in. And so, like with Breath of Fire, there is that moment where you're breathing and your brain is like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. I need to take a breath. And I always say, ask that question of what if? What if you just do it once more? What if you go like 5 seconds more? What if you do 3 more cycles? And there's a switch that flips. And all of a sudden your body's like, no, I got this. And then you can keep going for minutes more because the head has gotten out of the way and the body is now regulating itself and using the oxygen in the way that it's supposed to.
So what are the breath practices that are used the most in Kundalini? Are they all used or are there some used more than others?
Breath of Fire is going to be very popular if you go to a Kundalini class. Breath of Fire is probably the most popular.
Why?
I think because it's that traditional Kundalini rising, right? And I think I don't know how this will land, but to be honest, like I think that people go to Kundalini looking for a reaction, and Breath of Fire will give you that reaction, right? But from an energetic standpoint, Breath of Fire is very invigorating, and if we're looking to open and energize the body, Breath of Fire is a great way to do that. I personally think it is overstimulating, especially if we do it with Kundalini. Like I typically don't have a lot of Breath of Fire in my practice because I get overstimulated already and I want to keep us grounded. Or if I'm doing Breath of Fire, it is in a very grounded position where my hands are on the ground, my body's on the ground. Like I am anchored down as I do Breath of Fire. But
I mean, I think it's really somatic too. It's a very somatic, like if you are holding on an energy that doesn't serve you, that you need to get rid of, that you just need to burn through and get it out. Breath of Fire could be really good for that.
Yes. And Kundalini is the same. Like, a lot of times it's almost like you don't even realize all the things that are being processed as you're practicing, partly because it's that repetitive movement and like it's that intensity. Like you are fully in this moment of I'm, doing 70 million squats and I'm really tired and my legs are on fire and I don't know if I can do another one. And in the meantime, you have forgotten about all the other stuff you've brought to your mat and all the other things that you've been worried about. And, and like you literally leave a different person because you have just cleared out and you are just like, you are who you are. That's it.
Yeah, you can't do your shopping list or your list of things that you need to do tomorrow or what's happening at work when your legs are on fire.
Correct. Correct.
So it does. It gets you really into your body. It gets you connected with your breath. It connects the breath to the body, which is super powerful.
Yeah.
And then I think I almost think like with the mantras, you're activating your throat chakra, which a lot of people don't know how to use that throat chakra properly, or they're scared to use
100%.
it, or they use it in a ways that aren't like nurturing for the soul.
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then what about the mudras? Because you were saying before, not all the movements come with the mudras, but all the mudras come with like movement and breath.
Yes. So in Kundalini, it is very scientific, right? It's very formulaic in a sense of, if you want to activate the 10 bodies, here's a Kriya and here's how you do it. Like here are the 7 movements that you do and the mantras that you do. And so with that comes even the shape of our hands. And how we place our hands together or on our body. And even this, goalpost arms, that 90 degrees that we're creating, the 90-degree angle and the 90-degree angle, is specifically there to direct energy in a very detailed way into our body. And it's not just to kind of burn your shoulders out. It is to create kind of a feedback loop in the upper chakras and to open the torso, which is the lower chakras. And
I also think there's like a heart opening, a chest opening, like a
yes,
extroversion piece of it.
Very much so. And, look at the space you're taking up in that position too, right? Which, going back to that throat chakra, right? And so with that, even when we're doing simple things, it even goes as simple as like when I'm doing Sufi grind, which is that circle of the upper body in a seated position, we often put our hands on our lap, right? And then that feels very different than if you have your hands floating in the air. So if your hands are off of your body, that is very different because, again, it's subtle energies, right? And subtle shapes and making different movements with our body down to our hands and our fingers, right? And, Yana Mudra with the thumb and the first finger, or Agni Mudra with our thumbs up, like that creates fire. You do breath of fire with your fists together and your thumbs up at your heart, like, wow. That's a pot of coffee and a half right there versus, like Ganesh Mudra where, you're trying to really get grounded and you're pulling against your hands and it's, it's at your belly. And like, that's a very different energy and feeling than that Agni Mudra, right?
So you mentioned there's certain things that are scripted out so that they have like a sequence of them. Are there lots of those scripted out pieces?
Yes, very much so. And so, if you go to a traditional Kundalini class, you're going to have some familiar Kriyas, like everyone's going to be doing the same kind of things because, and I don't do a lot of them because I think a lot of those come from Yogi Bhajan. And so my teacher, I don't have those in my teaching from my teacher. Like I have the freedom, I've been given permission, which is different than the Yogi Bhajan lineage, to create my own, right? Like my teacher calls it Kriyanology, but it's that intuition of like, I know what my body needs and I know what I want to do and, have the understanding of the science behind it of like the 90-degree angles and the connection of the hands and the different chakras that come into play and things like that, and the breath and the sound. But then I get to do my own traditional Kundalini. Like there's, so many different Kriyas, like, Kriya to, I don't know, pick them, right? Like Kriya to clear the head, Kriya to, open the heart, Kriya to, Kriya of the 10 bodies and, all those different things. Those are very scripted. You do this first for 2 minutes, you do this for 1 minute, you do this for 6 minutes, you do this mantra for 11 minutes. And yeah, it is very scripted.
Interesting. So if you did go to traditional Kundalini classes across the country, after you've gone for a couple of months, you're going to see the common threads throughout all the classes.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
then how,
I think it's a lot like Ashtanga in that sense of, the practice is kind of the formulaic framework. And then within that, there are subtleties of shifts, whether the focus is in the gut or the head, whether, the mantra is longer or shorter, or there's other instruments like singing bowls or a harmonium or something with it too, like different layers that are added in and taken out.
And what's the feedback from your students that they feel the most when they're leaving the class? What do they identify with most commonly with?
So it's interesting because there isn't always an immediate difference in the practices that we do and when I teach Kundalini. But what happens is over a period of time, and it's not a very long period of time, there are major shifts in their whole world, in the way they approach things, their anger level, their anxiety level. They're so much calmer. They're so much more level-headed and non-reactive. They have these, I call them downloads, right? Where there's little light bulb moments of like, oh, I've always done it this way and I don't know why, and I'm going to do it this way now. Just little kind of shifts in their awareness and their perception of their whole world and the way they do their lives, the way they do everything, changes because our practice gives them that space to kind of become aware in a different way. And it gives them permission to do different and to explore other options. And so it's not like sometimes after a practice, it's like, whoo, that was a lot, or oh my gosh, that was amazing. I feel so much better. But for me and for a majority of the people that practice with me, like they don't leave the class being like, I'm so glad I did that. Often they leave the class like, yeah, I don't know if I really like that. And then they come back to it. And all of a sudden, like there'll be a day where, it'll be like, oh, wow, this is so, I get this now. Like, this is amazing. This is impactful. This is so powerful. X, Y, and Z has happened. And I didn't even realize that it was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other myths that people hold that we can maybe bust?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that the things that I always tell people when I talk about Kundalini, one, it is not necessarily a religious or spiritual practice. It does not have to be, and I don't really teach it that way. It can be if you choose it to be, just like yoga can be. And you don't have to have any physical ability to do it. Like I teach it in such an accessible way. You can do it in a chair. You can do it in your kitchen. You don't even need a yoga mat. I often do it in jeans. Like, it is such an accessible practice. And you don't have to have a good voice or know yoga poses or anything like that. Like it is just, it literally, I teach it with the approach of yoga of the householder.
Yeah. Yeah. And is there anything else that we missed about Kundalini that somebody would need to know, like going into a class, or that we want to warn them about or give them a heads up about or touch on?
So I don't know if I would warn them about anything. I think that everybody needs to approach this practice from their own personal standpoint and their own comfort level. I think just like anything, it's important to find your teacher and someone that you resonate with. I think just like a lot of other practices, it's easy to kind of be pulled into the have tos and the musts and, this is, you have to wear white and, all that kind of stuff. And like I taught at a studio for a while and you had to have this type of mat and wear these kind of yoga pants. And it's like, that is not me. Maybe that is something that you really desire. And so, just look around and give it a chance. Let it be, give it some time to really see if it resonates with you.
I mean, as a yoga teacher myself, I've always given people the advice that there's so many different styles and there's so many different types that
Yes.
go and try all the different types. But if you go and try Ashtanga, or if you try Kundalini, or if you try Anusara, go to a few teachers, because there's going to be a teacher that resonates with you. And maybe it's the style works, but it's not that teacher.
Yeah.
And so it's really just finding a teacher that resonates with you and sticking with it. And then everything in the beginning is very confusing. Like, I know for me, I just couldn't even tell left from right. And then after a while, it just feels more comfortable. And so it's moving through that discomfort of something new.
100%. Yes. Yeah. A good teacher is going to guide you through that discomfort and try and give as much support as possible and as much explanation. And, Kundalini has a steep learning curve because we often are speaking Sanskrit and not speaking English. We often are chanting, which is something we're not comfortable with. We often are moving our bodies in a different way, even though some of the postures feel familiar. Like, it's not just like walking into a yoga class that you've never done before. Like it's a whole nother layer of like, you are in a different language.
Yoga plus discomfort.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And so, like hopefully you'll find someone that helps you feel welcomed and like, this is weird for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. As if walking into a yoga class for the first time isn't uncomfortable enough.
100%. Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, this is super fun, Kris. How can people connect with you? What are some of your offerings? And of course, I'll throw all that in the show notes as well.
Fabulous. So everything is my name, Kris Batzner. And literally, I have a community called the Radiant Body Collective, where we do traditional yoga, we do Kundalini, we do sadhanas, we do workshops, all of that. It's online, and we have a lot of different resources as well as live aspects to interact with. You can find that on my website. It's krisbatzner.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of the socials. And I do somatic coaching as well, which incorporates a lot of what we've been talking about with Kundalini, as well as really kind of anchoring into the body. And I focus on helping women kind of empower them and step back into their own truth and helping them kind of accomplish their dreams and their goals that they've kind of put on the back burner.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for your conversation, for your time and your expertise. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Community Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. I can be found at www.nickyyoga.com, NICKYYYOGA.com. Until I see you again next week, I hope you have a beautiful day.